most widespread danger from nuclear explosions is fallout. Fallout is dust that is sucked up from the ground by the explosion. Since it can be carried for great distances by the winds, it can eventually settle anywhere. So no place in the United Kingdom is safer than any other. The risk is as great in the countryside as in the towns.
Have you ever wanted to feel bad, depressed, or feel like there's no hope in life? Well, good news for you, I got two films for you. I'm not really sure what got me onto this nuclear movie kick. It was probably when Severin announced that they would be releasing When the Wind Blows. I went to order it and went ahead and ordered Threads too because I've heard good things about it as well. You guys sure already know this because of my Blu-ray updates that nobody watches. Both Threads and When the Wind Blows are part of a series of films from the 80s that cover the Cold War and the cost of nuclear war. I've yet to see some of the other ones, but these are probably the best two. As a result of the growing tension between Russia and the US and the Middle East during this time, it was only natural to see a lot of films come out expressing the fears and realities of what could happen. Both these films got great releases by Severin. Not sponsored by Severin, but I am totally willing. Hit me up with that vault. So if you haven't seen either of these films, go buy them and watch them, because I'm totally going to spoil the bejeebers out of them, because I'm about to break these films completely down. Also, this video will contain some disturbing footage, so viewer discretion is advised. Threads was broadcasted on BBC Two on September 23, 1984. It became one of the highest rated programs on the channel with almost 7 million viewers. It's a devastating look into the long-term effects of a nuclear strike. It's stark, bleak, nihilistic, and honestly one of the most disturbing movies in my opinion ever made. Thread starts with a spider spinning a thread of webbing with a narration saying that every thread is integral to the structure of the web, just like how every person's life in some way affects the overall structure of civilization, that the interconnectivity of all these different actions both strengthen a society but also make it vulnerable. We meet Ruth and Jimmy in the countryside overlooking Sheffield, prospecting their future together. Ruth and Jimmy begin making out, and we cut to a title screen date of Thursday, May 5th. The news shows that Russians are mobilizing while Ruth and Jimmy are at a bar, and Ruth tells Jimmy she's pregnant. Sunday, May 8th, the USSR invades Iran as we see Jimmy's sister reading a magazine at a shop. Throughout the story, we keep getting cuts to military action and the impending doom builds. Jimmy is talking to his parents about Ruth being preggo. His parents are strongly against it when his mom mentions abortion. His old brother is playing some video games in the other room, and the tension builds until Jimmy storms out to take care of his birds. And boy does he love those birds. The film is set up like a drama documentary, giving cuts in between the plot with parts of society is running what production. We cut back to the story to see Ruth talking to her parents, who are a little bit more supportive.
It's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? Ought to have been a happy occasion.
The news is consistently playing in the background, talking about current affairs of the potential war while life just continues on. Thursday, May 12th. The tension of the war builds as Ruth and Jimmy go looking for a house to buy to begin their new life. Ruth can't wait to tear down the wallpaper and paint, and I can't blame her, it's ugly as sin. Tuesday, May 17th, the US gets involved in the growing war in the Middle East.
Now it's my problem.
The wartime controller begins to assemble a committee of what could be coming. Panic begins to grow in the citizens as everyone is out panic buying to stock up. Some things just never change. Thursday, May 19th, Jimmy visits his dad as he is working in the garden when a plane flies overhead. Jimmy doesn't think much about what's going on while his dad is preparing for the worst. The English military is beginning to mobilize outside of Sheffield. Jimmy and his buddy are at a bar getting lit when a newscast comes on talking about the nuclear conflict, and everybody gets quiet. The bartender changes the channel and everyone screams at him to change it back.
Whoa, ow! Hey, I was watching that.
Jimmy is starting to feel like maybe this isn't just nothing anymore. His friend teases him about becoming an old man, worrying about the news, getting married, and having a kid. Jimmy's friend eyes down a couple ladies across the bar and talks him into going over there to talk to him. We cut to Jimmy as the military drives by his vehicle. His windows are all steamy because Jimmy's with a girl. Well, that's not Ruth. Saturday, May 21st, protesters formed to try to change the government's mind on reinforcing Europe. Sunday, May 22nd.
You cannot win a nuclear war!
U.S. attacks Russia with B-52 bombers. Russia responds with a nuclear-tipped air defense missile, destroying many B-52s. The U.S. drops a nuke on the Soviet base. Once again, people are panic buying. The store is now price gouging. Things truly never change. A kid comes in and says the Americans and the Russians are fighting now, and everybody starts running out of the store with carts full of food. Jimmy is in his his aviary spending time with his birds while people are looting and panicking the streets. Tuesday, May 24th, the best day of the year. Jimmy's dad steps out to get some milk and sees the neighbors packing up to leave. The neighbors get stopped and the officer recommends they return home. Wednesday, May 25th. News breaks out of 2 nuclear explosions in the Middle East. Protesters are at it again when the police step in to break it up. The wartime controller heads down to the nuclear shelter to find out he's missing a large part of his staff.
Where the hell is everyone? There's only half of them here.
The radio is signaling to everyone that war is imminent. Jimmy and Ruth are scraping off that hideous wallpaper as Ruth breaks down. Jimmy confronts her like he ain't got no side bitches or nothing. Thursday, May 26th. The news is advising people on how to remove dead bodies while you're locked in your house. Ruth comes in from the morning sickness to her mother, telling her not to worry. It will only last a week or 2. Her mom goes to call Ruth's work to tell her that she's not coming in, unlike Jimmy, and the phones are dead. Jimmy's parents are working on a full-on fallout shelter in their living room, and Jimmy's mom sent out Jimmy's sister, Allison, to go to the store to get more food. At 8:30 in the morning in Sheffield, it's 3:30 in the morning in Washington, making it the slowest time for Western response. Then the alarm sounds.
Quite good. Attack warning. Is it for real? Attack warning, it's for bloody real. Is it? Come on, quick, get down!
A single warhead explodes over the North Sea. The shockwave begins ripping through the city. Jimmy and his friend duck underneath a truck. Jimmy panics and tries to find a way to get to Ruth while his friend stands in shock. Jimmy's parents rush to finish the shelter in their living room while 80 megatons falls on the UK. Ruth's parents work their grandma down into the basement. Ruth takes off looking for Jimmy as her dad catches her and brings her back home. Heat from the bomb melts everything in sight, including E.T. Buildings are erupting from the left and the right. The destruction of the bomb even traps the committee down inside their shelter. Everything outside in the open is engulfed in flames. This might be one of the most horrific scenes I've ever seen in a film. And we still have an hour left of this film. Jimmy's parents are alive in the shelter, but the mom is severely burned. His little brother and sister and Jimmy himself are all dead. Ruth's family is still alive in the basement, but are in shock and terrified. Only a half an hour after the bomb, ash begins to fall upon Sheffield. Both Jimmy and Ruth's parents are becoming very ill. Friday, May 27th, one day after the attack. Jimmy's mother is worried about his little brother Michael, as her and Jimmy's dad comes out from the shelter to look for him. They find most of their house is gone, and Michael's leg is sticking out of the debris. Sunday, May 29th, dusk continues to creep into the committee's shelter as they argue back and forth on what to do. 1 week after the attack, the food is controlled and given out by the central government. No food is given out until 2 weeks after the attack. Ruth's mom is trying to offer some food, but Ruth is coming to terms with Jimmy being dead and starts to resent her pregnancy. Jimmy's parents grow sicker and sicker. Back at Ruth's house, Ruth's grandma passed away. Her parents bring her body upstairs to cover her, and Ruth takes this moment to run away. While her parents are upset, they let her go and head back into the basement. Sunday, June 5th, Jimmy's dad begins walking around looking for some water where he sees some runoff. He drinks a handful of it and spits it back out. Must be coming from Flint. Ruth heads out into the wasteland to see exactly that. Rubble, dead animals, and lost people are everywhere. Then she sees a woman holding a dead baby, possibly thinking of her own future. And then some looters show up at Ruth's parents' house. Monday, June 6th, the ashes in the cloud have turned the world into a nuclear winter. Ruth comes to Jimmy's house to find Jimmy's mom dead. She finds one of Jimmy's old bird books and takes it with her. People are angry, demanding food, while the police are telling everyone to go home, and if they don't, they will be met with force. The police fire gas into the crowd while someone jumps the fence and is immediately shot dead. Saturday, June 11th, Ruth finds her way into a hospital that is overran with casualties. This is another truly horrifying scene. Looters emerge from the basement of Ruth's house. The police stop them. One of them takes off running and is shot dead while the other 2 are taken into custody. Jimmy's dad is at a campfire drinking but can't keep it down. In his hand is Michael's video game that still works. This is the last time we see Jimmy's dad alive. The bodies of people are too much to bury, and they're just left out in large piles. 4 weeks after the bomb, there are large detention camps for looters. A group of military finally dig their way into the committee's shelter to only find bodies. Ruth finally makes her way home to find her parents dead, and special courts are held to rule on what will happen to the looters. It's not good. 5 weeks after the bomb, masses leave the city in search of food. Death from the fallout are reaching their peaks, and Ruth makes her way to Buxton, about 20 miles from Sheffield, where she is put into a group living home until the old man kicks them all out. She then finds herself with a group of survivors when Jimmy's friend from before is there. He comes over and talks to her, but she says nothing to him. 6 weeks after the bomb, Ruth and Jimmy's friend team up to find food, and they just gnaw on some raw sheep. The darkness and the cold has hurt agricultural needs for food in the spring. Ruth is helping pick plants when her water breaks. She finds her way to the barn and gives birth Jesus style, and surprisingly the baby is born alive with little to no deformities. We cut to Christmas as the baby screams. Ruth just looks dead inside, staring off into space. Everyone else around her is uneasy. May, 1 year after the attack. Ruth is buying some rats for food, which considering where we are today, I wouldn't do that. The skies begin to clear, but the ultraviolet rays become much harsher. Cataracts and risk of cancers begin to grow. 10 years after the bomb, Ruth and her daughter are farming when Ruth collapses. Ruth passes away. Her daughter calls out Ruth instead of Mom, which makes me wonder if she ever even loved her daughter. And maybe that she just distanced herself from the daughter. Ruth's daughter can only say a few words. When Ruth dies, her daughter begins looting her belongings and leaves, without really shedding much emotion. Next to Ruth's pillow, we see Jimmy's old book, holding on to memory of him till the very end. A group of kids are gathered around a TV as they watch a VHS tape teaching them words, almost like school would. The children are breaking down sweaters and old cloth materials for threads, showcasing that civilization is no longer threaded together. 13 years after the bomb, the kid is trying to cook a rabbit when two boys show up trying to get it. All the kids are very limited on what they say, and the kid teams up with the two boys and begin looting. One of them is shot as Bonnie and Clyde escapes. We got to see Kid walking around by herself, pregnant. As she wanders into a shelter because her baby is on the way, the baby is a stillborn. The woman hands the kid the dead baby, and that's the end of the movie.
What the fuck is that?
So yeah, that was Threads. Not exactly what I would call a fun watch. In all honesty, it's one of the most depressing and disturbing films I've ever seen. That ending leaves no hope at all. The first time I watched it, I was taken out of the experience with it being a drama with documentary elements, but watching it a second time, it really didn't bother me at all. I enjoyed it a lot more in the second viewing. Threads is just a brutal showcase of what could happen or still could happen. I mean, almost 40 years later, and this film is still relevant today. The cinematography is top-notch, the film looks amazing from framing, the shot composition, from the lighting, all the way to the set design and wardrobe. It's just a gorgeous-looking film. When you have this pseudo-documentary elements, it really helps the film to feel as real as possible, and Threads definitely does. Even in today's modern pandemic, a lot of what's happening with public panic in this film is happening today. I also love how the film balances when people who kind of ignore what's happening in the world only to worrying about their lives, and the people who prepare obsessively, and everyone in between. It showcases all these different mentalities of global panic really well. It's not as blatant as something like When the Wind Blows, and it's a lot more subtle, but it honestly feels like people you would probably recognize in your own social circles. Performance-wise, I can't think of one bad performance in this whole film, and I'd also say that Meagher gave an amazing performance, and honestly one of those performances that really brought the film together and will stick with you long after you watch this film. This is a truly stark, gripping, and disturbing film that is one that I think everybody should watch at least once. When the Wind Blows came out in 1986 based on the comic book by Raymond Briggs. Briggs based the central characters Hilda and James around his own parents, a simple working class couple trying to survive the nuclear holocaust. The film is directed by Jimmy T. Murakami. Murakami is a Japanese American who had to change his name from Teruaki to Jimmy during his stay at a Japanese internment camp after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And much like Threads, history repeats itself. The Severin Blu-ray of When the Wind Blows comes with a great documentary about Murakami and the Japanese internment camps that I would highly recommend watching.
I'd never forgive all those assholes, you know, and I mean, no one has a right to do what they did to the Japanese American citizens, you know, and I mean, it was just unheard of, and really, it's a part of history that is going to be around for long, scarred this country forever, you know, and it's only because this country has always claimed democracy, democratic, in the land of the free and home of the brave, and all that bullshit, you know, that they have in the songs and everything. And it's, you know, and look at what they do to. I was singing that song in school, in grammar school. I was pledged every morning. I had a pledge allegiance to the flag in the classroom, you know, and you know, I mean, for all the way through high school and grammar school, and they throw you in camp over that, you know, because you're Japanese American.
Murakami also had a relative who lived in Hiroshima when they dropped the bomb, so he felt like he had an emotional connection to the film. The ripples that the bomb created in Murakami's life definitely feels like it bled over into When the Wind Blows. The animation style is stunning and unlike anything I've ever seen before. They painted all the backgrounds, built real sets, and used clay animation throughout the environment, and then animated single cells of the characters into the environment. There's also segments that's 100% hand-drawn like a flip book, blending all these elements seamlessly to create a unique and beautiful animation style that I have never seen before. So let's just break this down already. The film starts with a large military convoy driving through England at night when we see that the movement is captured in a newspaper that James is reading. We then get opening credits with David Bowie's banger When the Wind Blows playing.
I dread to think of when the wind blows, when the wind blows.
James takes the bus home and still has a long way to walk after that, showing just how far out in the country they live. James enters the house and hangs up his coat, and that just shows how seamless this animation is. The coat goes from 2D animation to 3D prop as he hangs it up. Hilda meets him in the kitchen as she's cooking. She asks him why he seems so down, and he says he's been reading the papers about the growing war tensions. They begin eating and talking about the last war that wasn't so bad. Hilda doesn't seem worried about it at all, while James seems to panic as he hears on the radio that war could be coming in 3 days. He grabs his nuclear war packets and begins to read them as he eats his pie. James wants to be as prepared as possible, while Hilda just doesn't want him tearing up the house. That's something I really love about this movie, is that the couple showcases both sides of the spectrum during times like this. You have the one who is panicking and over-preparing, and then you have the other who kind of thinks nothing of it, like nothing's going on, there's nothing to worry about. Hilda then goes outside and begins daydreaming, while James is building a shelter and making a lot of noise and snapping her out of her daydream, showing that his behavior is influencing hers. James then calls his son to ask a question and finds out that his son isn't building a shelter. His son makes jokes out of it by laughing and singing, and James worries and tells him that he needs to build a shelter. It is his bound duty to carry out the government instructions during this time of war. We cut to James and Hilda reminiscing about the Second World War, saying how Russia used to be on their side and they can't believe they are against them now. The two talk about staying in shelters as kids. Their memories are fond of the war as if it was like a fun time. It's a really interesting way to show how some kids cope with war and tragedies.
Old Jerry coming over every night.
Those were the days.
James is reading that they need to stock up on some food and asks Hilda if she wants anything, but leaves before she answers. James returns without any bread, saying there's some sort of panic buying. Apparently that's always going to happen. He basically brought back some snack foods, including some Christmas pudding, and Hilda responds with saying it'll all be over by Christmas. Yeah, you're probably right.
After all, it'll all be over in a flash.
James begins painting the windows white. He's willing to follow just about any information the powers that be gives with no questions, believing that they know best. Hilda questions him on these instructions, on how they'll actually work on protecting them, and James kind of struggles to find answers and just basically states that the powers to be knows best. Over time, Hilda begins to break down and starts to help James on preparing, getting very involved, and believing on what the officials say blindly as well. Much like Threads, we have a few cuts here and there of military mobilization. James begins to block off the windows while him and Hilda talk about who leads Russia now. You can slightly hear an airplane flying overhead. James is reading off the list of essential items that the pamphlet says, and it's honestly kind of ridiculous. It just shows how little they knew what would happen and how ridiculous the ways to protect yourself are.
Try to keep the younger people indoors as much as possible. In fact, it will be far wiser for only people over 30 to work outside until things get better.
The film is almost like a satire of blindingly following directions that really make no sense.
An enemy missile attack has been launched against this country. It is estimated that the missiles will arrive in approximately 3 minutes.
Oh dear, I'll just
Stay
get the washing.
indoors and take
Come
cover.
back, you stupid bitch, and
Lie
get in the
down.
shelter!
I've left the
Do
oven
not
on.
leave your
Get in,
homes.
get in,
Stay
get in!
indoors
The
and take
cake
cover.
will be burned.
Lie down.
The missile hits and we get this cool animation sequence of the devastation. Buildings being leveled, cars crashing, and even a train being derailed. The storm even works its way to James and Hilda's house, shattering their wedding photo and a transition into life that will never be the same. Hilda and James are shaken, but both are trying to think positively. They look out of their shelter to see their house in rubble. Hilda even makes a statement saying,
I'll never get them clean.
Hilda tries to leave to clean and James yells at her to stay in because of the fallout. Hilda says she can't see any fallout, but James insists they stay in. The next morning, Hilda again wants to come out and clean while James tries to keep her busy by reading a war book that he got from the library. He lists off all the military organizations and saying that we should be safe with them looking over us, and Hilda responds with, "It didn't stop them from bombing us, did it?"
Got him!
The next morning they wake up both complaining of aching pains and headaches with fatigue. Without thinking, James gets up and walks out of the shelter wanting to make a cup of tea. Considering how James has been acting throughout the film, this seems really out of character, showcasing the effects of radiation on the brain. Even in this state, when he tries to turn the stove on with the electric being off, he says it's a smart move on the government to conserve power. He tries the radio and then the TV, both being dead. Hilda's having a harder time getting around the house as he tries the hand radio, which is also dead, saying it must be the batteries. Hilda suggests they just pop down to the store sometime and get some. It's interesting to see how they think everything should still be normal after the bomb, almost like in a state of shock, or maybe their mental state is just deteriorating that fast. They are worried about their son if he made it back alright, which makes me wonder if during the bomb scene, one of those cars involved in the car crash was their son and his family. The film's time passage is not exactly clear on how long or how many days it's been since the bomb, making this time frame as jarring as it would be to be in this situation. Hilda finally gets to clean up a little bit. The couple feels weak and starts laying around complaining about being tired and aching. Hilda says she needs to clean up in case someone comes over. James insists that the emergency services will be coming anytime. The couple also mentions a loss of appetite when James realizes they should have stayed in the shelter. He wonders if there's any radiation around and Hilda says she can't see any. The couple re-enter the shelter when Hilda says if you can't see it and can't feel it, it can't be there. They wake up and Hilda says she kept getting sick through the night. James suggests they go outside for some fresh air, stating that he read in the official guide that they only need to stay inside the shelter for 48 hours, not 14 days. Earlier in the film, he mentioned the 14 days a couple times, which makes me wonder if he's not lying to her to make her feel better, or maybe his mind's just that far gone. They head outside to see the dark wasteland. Hilda asks James if he can see any fallout, and James says no, but the sun is trying to get through. As they walk around, they notice the milkman is late. We get a wide shot of the pure destruction of the bomb that the couple is completely unaware of by living so far out in the country. Hilda ends up getting sick out in the yard, mentioning to James that she had some diarrhea. James shakes it off as just nerves, that even he, a man, got it too. He brings out some chairs so they can sit out in the garden when it begins to rain. He decides to collect the rainwater, and Hilda wants to boil it just to be on the safe side to make some tea. It's still gonna be cleaner than Flint's. James starts setting up a table with food as he says in no time help will come, spraying them with antidote and giving them some pills so they'll be back to normal. Once again, James talks fondly of the war as when they were kids, asking soldiers for some gum. They talk about what they would do if the Russians end up coming. Throughout this whole movie, they keep getting the Russians and Germans confused, and Hilda suggests if the Russians do come, just make them some tea. We cut to Hilda making some eggs. Both Hilda and James are starting to show rings around their eyes as they get sicker and sicker. Hilda only takes a few bites of food and she can't eat anymore, and she complains that she can't wash up her dishes. James is sitting on the couch, his condition is clearly worsened, asking for something to drink when Hilda says there's nothing to drink, and for the first time, James begins to panic about what they will do. Later on, James asks Hilda if she's wearing any lipstick because her lips are red. Hilda says she isn't and then notices that her gums are bleeding. As always, James tries to explain it as something else, like ill-fitting dentures. She mentions there was blood when she went to the restroom and James admits he has too. James is comforting Hilda as he says there's nothing wrong with her, and as he looks out the window you can see the face of realization that everything's not okay. Hilda and James are basically on their deathbeds as James sticks to his guns and telling Hilda that everything will be alright, but the powers at be will make everything alright, and it's clear that they both lost a lot of weight. James is starting to lose his eyesight when Hilda notices there are spots on her legs. James again tells her there's nothing to worry about, that's just part of being old. Hilda then runs her hands through her hair and big clumps come out. Hilda suggests they get back into their paper bags just in case. They get into their paper bags and head back into their shelter. Even in this trying time, close to death, James stands strong that the powers at be will come and help them. Hilda suggests they should pray. You can hear the trembling fear in James' voice as he leads the prayer, and the prayer leads to the credits. Honestly, I completely love this movie. It's a very hard watch and one that really punches you in the chest as the film carries on. You have these two sweet and innocent characters that you just instantly fall in love with, and you have to watch them just deteriorate over the course of the film, living through this hellish nightmare that all you want for them to is escape. Both Peggy Ashcroft and John Mills, the voices of Hilda and James, really bring their characters to life with their performances. The animation, like I've said, is beyond stunning. Going into this film for this review, I rewatched it after watching all the special features, and knowing a little bit more of how they did the animation in this film made the animation stand out even more to me. If you're a fan of animation, this is a must-watch without a doubt. I'd even say this is a must-watch in general. It's a really well-written story that balances a lot of tones really well. From comedy to tragedy, everything feels balanced and earned. I really like having the two main characters having such a different reaction to everything happening. You have the one that is like super over-prepared and the one that, just blows it off, and how their thought processes can influence each other. The blind faith of James just trusting the government that everything's going to be alright is played off as almost a satire and makes for some really humorous moments, but some really sad moments as well. Comparing this to Threads, I definitely like When the Wind Blows more. Being animated, it's a little easier to digest, and James' constant hopefulness makes it a little easier to stomach than Threads' bleak despair. But let's be honest here, neither one of these films are pleasant watches. Both are devastating and both serve different purposes on telling the same story that is still relevant to this day. These are both films I would consider essential viewings and important pieces of cinematic history. Threads being the more realistic pseudo-documentary, while When the Wind Blows being a more digestible and family-friendly in a sense film that both serve as a potential warning. It's been hard sitting through these films as much as I have to make this video, but I hope you enjoyed it. I need to go do an eye wash because this has been brutal.
Get a gun and blow my brains out before it happens to the bomb. because you're not going to survive, I wouldn't even